Hi, this is Lippy. I'm a shamanic healer, and in today's video, I am going to cover 5 steps that you can use to create boundaries that actually stick. Before you watch this video, I strongly suggest you watch my other video, which is called Why Setting Boundaries Doesn't Always Work, because that video is very strongly connected to step 1, or rather I would say the pre-preparation for step 1, because just quickly to recap, one of the reasons that boundaries don't stick is that we set them very superficially, as in there are tons of articles out there and videos about how to set boundaries, and most of them focus on using a particular tone of voice, a particular language, and setting a boundary about something to protect yourself or defend yourself. But most of them don't cover the deeper issues that are involved in setting boundaries. And when I say deeper issues, I'm talking about some emotional woundings that you may have, and these woundings may prevent you from setting a boundary. So you may get assertive or use the right tone of voice or decide what exactly your boundaries are, but that is insufficient. You need a stronger foundation to make the boundaries stick. So I strongly suggest you watch that video first, and I'm gonna copy paste it down below in the link so that you have easy access to it, and then you can use this video as a follow-up, because it will make more sense. um, Otherwise it would be difficult to follow. So the first step to setting boundaries that stick is to create a strong foundation. Now, what do I mean when I say create a strong foundation? So I want to talk to you a little bit about the history, or your personal history with boundaries. And if you have been brought up, like most of us have, on the current paradigm of in the current paradigm of child rearing, there are very, very strong chances that you don't have any kind of foundation to set boundaries, because most likely you were not taught how to set boundaries. And when you protested unfair behavior as a child, most likely you were squashed, you were oppressed, you were not allowed to express yourself, and therefore your natural defense mechanisms, or what we would call the fight mechanism, not fight in a negative way, but fight as in self-defense mechanism, may have been put out of service. And if you try to create boundaries superficially by using a certain tone of voice, saying a certain, using a certain script, or any of these other methods that are currently very popular, you will find that the boundaries will not stick, and they will collapse when you need them the most. So what we need to probably do is look at first what it is that's stopping you from setting boundaries. What are the emotional wounds that are thwarting your ability to set boundaries? Now, depending on your situation and depending on the level of trauma you have around this issue, your emotional wounds could be something you could clean up very easily, or it may be something that may take a long time, especially in the case of, say, people who suffer from severe complex post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety, or any of these other sort of traumatic disorders or dissociation, because you may have what we call shamanically huge gaps in your energetic field, or what we call energy holes, and your energy literally leaks out through these energy holes. So if you have these kind of energetic leaks, it would be very, very difficult for you to set boundaries that stick till you take care of those leaks. Now, luckily, shamanism has an excellent system for healing trauma. It has an excellent system for healing energetic leaks. This is not to say that it is the one and only system. uh, Please feel free to follow whatever works for you. This video is not some kind of propaganda for shamanism in any way, but of course that is what I do. So I have found that to be one of the most powerful ways to address the concept of energetic holds, because a lot of other modalities do not address this concept or understand this concept. And I'm just going to share an example with you of what I mean over here. So one of the things that I found would happen to me, and I talked about this in my other video about why setting boundaries doesn't always work. When I tried to set boundaries, is I would feel an inner weakness. I would feel a lack of strength when I tried to stand up for myself, and it was almost like trying to put a light switch on, but you you press it with your finger, and then you find that your finger has no strength, so you're pressing the button, but it doesn't go on because there's just no strength in your finger. And that's how I used to feel when I was trying to set boundaries. And what I found out shamanically is we have a concept called soul retrieval, which is based on the idea that when you're traumatized, certain parts of your essence literally go missing. So they literally fragment, pieces of you fragment. And what I found was the inner strength part of me had been very, very fragmented, and was not only depleted, it was practically gone. Like there were parts of it that had just left, and there were huge holes in my solar plexus area. So there was very little strength coming from there, and therefore I had a tough time getting boundaries to stick. So I use certain shamanic techniques to plug those holes, and believe me, it made a huge difference to my ability to defend myself, to set boundaries, to be assertive, and in ways that really work. So you can still do it, but it may not work as well. This is what I'm trying to say. So setting a strong foundation is really about getting your emotional wounds out in the light, trying to understand what it is that's stopping you currently from setting boundaries, or what it is that makes you feel weak when you try to set them, and working on that before you go about working on the cognitive and outer world aspects. Step two is to ensure that before you set a boundary, it should be an absolute no for you. Now, what do I mean when I say that it should be an absolute no for you? Because one of the things that happens is when you learn about setting boundaries from either psychoeducation literature or watching videos or whatever other means that you come across this idea and this methodology, you will see that a lot of times people don't really know what their own boundaries are, and there's a tendency to borrow what boundaries you should have. So it becomes a should. It's not like I need to have this boundary, or I want to have this boundary, or this boundary is something that is suitable for my value system, but it becomes more about, oh, I should set this boundary because X and Y said I should, or I should set this boundary because I read this amazing article and it says I should have this as a boundary, which I currently don't. But for something to really stick with you, it needs to be authentic. It needs to be something that really is an absolute no for you. Now, I would like to give credit for this term absolute no to an amazing author whose book I'm also going to recommend in this video. And it's a book I strongly recommend for anyone who is trying to learn more about the concept of self-care. And the book is called Extreme Self-Care by Cheryl Richardson. Amazing book. It is one of my go-to books when I'm feeling down and I feel like I'm slipping in my self-care regime. And it goes so much deeper than the standard ideas of self-care about bubble baths and vacations and things like that, which are actually very superficial and wonderful in their own ways to take care of yourself. Self-care is a little bit messier than that, but that's the topic for another video. And in this book, Cheryl's book, she talks about this concept of the absolute no. And how do you decide when something is an absolute no for you? Well, I know I've decided when something is an absolute no for me is when I'm done with something. I'm done with a certain behavior. I'm done with a certain energy coming into my life. I'm done with dealing or tolerating with a certain thing, but then I have to be done. So to me, when I say an absolute no, it has to be because I'm really done with it. So make sure that when you set a boundary, and there is a whole chapter on what is your absolute no in the book Extreme Self-Care by Cheryl Richardson, and so you can use that as a reference. But what is your extreme no? Sorry, absolute no is very individual. So I can't really sort of sit here and say, this is what should be your absolute no. I don't know. I know what my absolute no's are in some areas of my life now, and that is what you need to figure out. Because I would like to give credit for this term absolute no to an amazing author whose book I'm also going to recommend in this video. And it's a book I strongly recommend for anyone who is trying to learn more about the concept of self-care. And the book is called Extreme Self-Care by Cheryl Richardson. Amazing book. It is one of my go-to books when I'm feeling down and I feel like I'm slipping in my self-care regime. And it goes so much deeper than the standard ideas of self-care about bubble baths and vacations and things like that, which are actually very superficial and wonderful in their own ways to take care of yourself. Self-care is a little bit messier than that, but that's the topic for another video. And in this book, Cheryl's book, she talks about this concept of the absolute no. And how do you decide when something is an absolute no for you? Well, I know I've decided when something is an absolute no for me is when I'm done with something. I'm done. I'm done with a certain behavior. I'm done with a certain energy coming into my life. I'm done with dealing or tolerating with a certain thing, but then I have to be done. So to me, when I say an absolute no, it has to be because I'm really done with it. So make sure that when you set a boundary, and there is a whole chapter on what is your absolute no in the book Extreme Self-Care by Cheryl Richardson, and so you can use that as a reference. But what is your extreme no? Sorry, absolute no is very individual. So I can't really sort of sit here and say, this is what should be your absolute no. I don't know. I know what my absolute no's are in some areas of my life now, and that is what you need to figure out. Because when it is an absolute no, it will catalyze your strength to be able to have a boundary that sticks. Because this video is not about setting boundaries. This video is about setting boundaries that stick. The third step is to create two layers of boundaries. I'm just going to quickly explain what I mean by two layers. So most of us, when we set a boundary, we set an outer boundary that says someone may not yell at me, for example, or I will protest bad behavior, or from tomorrow onwards I will not do more than 2 hours of social media a day, or people may not call me after 9 p.m., etc., etc. Now, this is very important, of course, because you need to define your outer boundary very well. But what many people miss out is also defining your inner boundary. And what I mean by this is, to support the outer boundary, you need a corresponding inner boundary. So let's go back to the example of, say, from tomorrow, I will not do more than 2 hours of social media. Now, if you have a boundary like that, but you don't have an inner boundary that says that I value my time. So my inner boundary is that I value my time, and I value myself enough to honor deadlines. If you don't have that inner boundary, then do you see how the outer boundary of not spending more than 2 hours on social media would be kind of wobbly, because there isn't anything sort of holding it up. There's no inner value holding it up. So before you think of the outer boundary, also look at what is the inner value, or what is important for you, or what is an inner need that you may have, because needs and boundaries are very strongly connected. That is another video that I'm going to make, that is going to hold up that outer boundary. So if I have a again, an outer boundary that says people may not yell at me, but I don't have any inner boundary against low self-esteem. So I constantly berate myself. So I yell at myself from within. Like my inner critic is very loud, for instance. There are very few chances that my outer boundary of people not yelling at me is going to stick around very long, or maybe it will happen to stick around in a few instances. But the minute the inner gap is provoked or triggered in a certain way, you find that the boundary just collapse. It doesn't stick, because you don't have the inner self-worth or the inner self-esteem or inner boundary against your own critic to correspond with the outer boundary, if that makes sense. I know that this may sound like a slightly strange concept to some of you, so I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have about it. Please do ask. I would be very happy to elaborate further on this topic. The fourth step, I hope I got the fourth step right, as in the number. Today I'm really going crazy with numbers. So we did the third step, and now we're going to go to the fourth step. Yes, it is the fourth step. This is very important. Use a script that works for you. Now, again, as I have said, all the literature that is currently there on boundaries is very oriented towards the cognitive aspect of boundaries, and a lot of the cognitive tutoring, the tutoring for cognitive, this cognitive aspect, comes with scripts of, what you should say, what are the words you should say, what is the tone you should use when you are setting a boundary. And it's good. I'm not saying that the scripts aren't of any value. They definitely have value. The tone is important, and most of the time it works better when you use an assertive tone. I can't argue with that. But there are two things that are missing here, is that sometimes the script may not be in line with how you normally communicate, as what is a norm for you. And when that happens, again, authenticity is the key here. So if you have a script that is very different from the way you normally communicate, you're going to find that it's going to not stick very well, because you probably forget what you're going to say, or you'll have to like literally rehearse your boundaries. And it's also going to sound weird, because it's like for 10 minutes you've been talking about X in a certain way, because everyone has their own method of communication and their own terminology, and suddenly you have to set this boundary, and out comes this scripted thing, and it it just sounds weird. And I know it's up to you. If you like your scripts, have your scripts, but I have found that it's better to have your own. So re-script something to make it sound like it's coming from you and sounds more like what you would say, or more like how you would say it. So it feels more authentic, and it sounds more authentic, and it works better, simply. The other thing is the tone aspect. Now, yes, it's true that most of the time, is it better to be aggressive or assertive? I would choose assertive any day, but there are times you may need to be aggressive. So don't get stuck on this idea that there is only one tone, and that's the right tone of voice, or this particular pitch that you must use. If you need to use an aggressive tone, if that is applicable to your situation, that's fine. If you need to use a more passive tone, if that's applicable to your situation, that's fine as well. Look at the situation. Don't get life is not about textbook instructions. The fifth step, the final step, and I'm gonna have to do this quickly because I'm shooting this video during the sunset, and the natural light is going down quickly, so I think the screen may be turning darker and darker. So we have very little time to get this done. The fifth step here is to write out what follows, because let me share something with you. When you do start to set boundaries, you may find a lot of resistance coming up in your life, both from within yourself and also from the people around you. You may find that suddenly people are mad at you because you're setting boundaries, and there's a whole other video where we can talk about how to handle that when that happens, and what kind of people are probably going to get mad at you. And usually they are the cluster B types or the disorder types, but there are also people who are not disordered and would get mad at you because they're not used to you setting a boundary. And you're going to need to have to deal with that. And the other thing that I have noticed, I don't know whether it's a law of attraction thing or maybe it is that when you decide to set a boundary, you keep getting these incidents coming your way where you have to set the boundary. It's almost like you say, okay, I'm going to set this boundary, and it's like you're getting tested immediately by the universe. Now, I haven't entirely figured out why that happens, but one thing that has made sense to me in my understanding of it is that the reason it's happening is to strengthen your boundary, because the more times you say no, the more times you set the boundary, the stronger the boundary gets, the stronger. So remember that behavior gets reinforced by repetition, and you actually make grooves in your neural pathways in your brain with behavior. So one of the ways that your boundaries do get stronger is by repeatedly say, saying them aloud, asserting yourself with them. So you may find that the universe starts throwing you into situations where you're gonna have to set boundaries. You're gonna have to set that boundary that you said you would. So be ready to write that out, because if you do the first 4 steps and then you're not ready for step 5, if you're not ready to take that action, then you're going to find yourself falling back.